We are really privileged to be able to have Richard Hammar here with us and Jerry Sparks to talk with us. And we've got some questions that we want to ask you. Could I get here? I'm going to get this other mic for you, Jerry, so that you have a microphone. We've got some questions that have come in. And first of all, Richard, we would like you to tell us what your resources are that you've got online and various newsletters and whatnot that you send out.
Yeah, my website is churchlawandtax.com, and there all my resources are there. My church law and tax report. If you want kind of the basic plan, it would be the church law and tax report newsletter, 32 pages, six times a year, and it just keeps you fully informed of legal tax developments happening around the country. I don't know how a better way to do it. I put a lot of time putting that thing together. The current issue, the next issue I'll be doing, has a feature article on assumption of risk and waivers I mentioned before, based on this massive research I've done. So to make sure if you're using these forms, you do it, you do so appropriately. And then my book, Pastor, Church, and Law, which is now in the 4th edition, I'm in the process of making that a purely digital product that you can access on the website. And I will be able to continually update that book rather than wait 5 or 10 years for a new edition. And then, of course, my annual Church and Clergy Tax Guide, which is at 750 pages now. The IRS National Office uses it. They call it their Bible, they've told me. And boy, that's pathetic when you think about it. But anyway, so there you go. Those are the key resources. Many others, but those are the key ones.
And I just wanted to remind everybody, if you would like to get the PowerPoint that he showed, text the word ebook to 51400, 51400, the word ebook, and all of our district council resources are there on that file sharing program. I would like to ask another question to Brother Hammar about the Fair Labor Standards Act. Department of Labor has been making lots of noise about the Fair Labor Standards Act and how that might impact churches. Can you talk to us about that just for a moment?
Well, keep in mind the Fair Labor Standards Act that was enacted by Congress in 1937 as part of the New Deal, it contains a number of provisions, including minimum wage and overtime. That if somebody works more than 40 hours a week, you have to pay them time and a half overtime. And, of course, minimum wage. For these laws, the reason they're having some noteworthiness today is because the Department of Labor is considering amending the definition of exempt employees. These are employees that are exempt from the overtime law. Currently, that's an employee who performs certain specified duties as an executive, administrative, or professional employee and meets a salary test of approximately $24,000 per year. So we have the situation today where you could have people that meet the duties test of a professional, executive, or administrative employee and are getting paid $24,000 a year. That's below the poverty level for a family of 4. So there's been a need. That number has been increased, I think, twice in the last 50 years, and there's been a need to increase it. And so the proposal by the administration is to increase that to approximately $50,000. It's a very complicated formula, but it's going to be about $50,000. So the Department of Labor published a pending regulation several months ago, and they've had over 500,000 comments on it that they're working their way through. Usually they don't phase the Department of Labor. They do what they want. But let's say that it ends up being a $50,000 salary test in addition to the duties test, which are probably not going to change much. How does that impact churches? Well, it will impact anybody on your staff that it meets the definition of a professional, administrative, or executive employee, and for some of you that could be several, and that's being paid less than $50,000 a year. All of a sudden, they're going to have to be paid time and a half. Now, let me just make one other clarification that a lot of people are missing, and that is in a number of places, the Department of Labor has said that clergy are exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so I'll be doing another article on this when it's finalized, when these regulations are finalized, which could be any day. At first, I thought it was going to be September, but I think it'll be before that now. But just remember that clergy even if they're paid less than $50,000, and that's what the threshold is, if that's what it becomes, you're not going to have an entitlement probably to overtime because of the First Amendment guarantee of religious freedom. That's going to, so far, the Department of Labor has acknowledged this, that we do not consider churches, clergy, to be covered employees. And there have been a number of federal courts I talk about in my various publications that have reached that same conclusion.
Jerry Sparks has been our insurance agent for some time, and we've got a great friendship. We've had a lot of talks recently about the liability associated with foreign missions trips, and I want to make sure that we get that covered here this morning. So could you talk to us about the liability that our local churches may have in regards to foreign missions trips and what they might be able to do to protect themselves?
Yeah, a lot of people that don't realize this, and even going through the general counsel under their program that they currently have, there was not foreign liability included in the insurance program when you travel out of the country. And recently, we actually had a couple cases, because what you don't understand is when a church gets sued for a claim, a lot of times the district will be sued, and of course the general counsel gets sued. So if any of you take foreign mission trips to foreign countries, if one of your volunteers gets hurt and sues for bodily injury or property damage due to an automobile accident or gets hurt in another way, you can be held possibly liable if there's negligence on your part.
And the extraterritorial exclusion.
Yeah, under your current policy, there is an extraterritorial exclusion as long as it happens outside the United States of America, the Virgin Islands, or any of the U.S. territories.
And what that means is you have no coverage.
That's what it means.
What if they bought the insurance through MAPS? They got the medical coverage, but isn't that not sufficient?
That covers medical coverage. It doesn't cover liability at this time. We're working on that right now. As Mr. Hammer said, we spent a couple weeks writing a new assumption of risk form for foreign travel. So we are actually helping our world missions to come up with a new assumption of risk form, and then actually Rich has got the first draft of a parental consent form.
I've read these 3,500 cases, and every case since Thomas Jefferson dealing with assumption of risk forms. And so now I've got this ability to focus on assumption of risk forms and zero in on their defects. And so what I oftentimes do is look at forms created by Harvard University, because you think they have the best legal counsel. So their form is pathetic. I identified 4 glaring errors in their form. I'm mentioning that in my article.
And if you look at our form, it takes care of those 4 glaring things.
That's right.
What most people don't realize, if you buy a foreign liability policy to do a missions trip, a lot of times an insurance company is going to charge you $2,500 minimum premium just for going on that trip. And it covers you for $1 million worth of liability. And here's the issue. Churches that are sending 5 to 10 people say $2,500 just for that protection. Doesn't include medical. It just includes liability if I'm sued. And they don't buy it. A lot of you guys do buy it. A lot of districts buy it. General counsel has a foreign policy. But what we're doing is we're trying to set up a new program as we speak because of some issues that came to light to Rich and myself. And the new program will include this automatically, and it will cost less than $5 per traveling day per person. So we're actually trying to address this issue right now.
So when will that be rolled? So this is going to be a website where people go and they put in their information about their church and how many people are in their team, and they actually buy per day per everybody that's there. When is that going to be available?
We're hoping, I'm actually hoping by June 1st is what I'm hoping. We've got Rich to get the parental consent form, and then we'll get together with AGWM. I've got a meeting next week with U.S. Missions because we're going to actually be able to we're going to actually make this program available to U.S. Missions for people will have medical payments and that sort of stuff for anybody taking U.S. missions trips also. So this is, until a couple years ago, people really didn't realize the liability to this happen until there's lawsuits. And as major lawsuits come up, there was a case in Connecticut where how much was it?
$42 million.
$42 million against a school that sent a team to China. And this actually went to the Connecticut Supreme Court, and they upheld the verdict against the school. And the reason being is they did not give proper warning to the children that were going on this trip to wear long pants or to have insect repellent.
It was tick-borne encephalitis. This girl contracted, 15-year-old girl, became permanently disabled.
And it was a $42 million lawsuit. And of course, the school had an assumption of risk form at that time.
Yes, and it was a waiver of liability form signed by the girl's parents, and the court threw it out because of the general rule, which I'm addressing in this article I'm working on, that parents can release or waive their legal claims with respect to themselves, the pain and suffering they experience, the loss of society or companionship of their minor child, but they have no legal ability to waive their minor child's legal claims. That's what a lot of people don't recognize. So signing a waiver or release form as a mom or dad for a minor child, that is basically worthless.
So
and that's what happened in this case. The school waived the release signed by the father. They said that means nothing.
So really, when you look at it, having foreign liability insurance where you might have just said, we're going to trust God, and, Brother Hammer is always saying with kids, since he does the 5th grade kids in a Sunday school, that the best thing for them to do is play chess.
Well, that's true.
But we recognize that people get a lot out of going to foreign missions. So, my daughter went, and she went to Nicaragua, and I will tell you that here I'm the insurance guy, and I'm sitting there going, wow. She comes back and tells me all the things that happen, and I'm going, and I let her go on the trip. And you think about it, we need to protect people that are going on these trips, and that's what Rich and I are trying to do with the assumption of risk form, to protect the church, the district that they belong to, and the general counsel, but then also be able to provide insurance in case the unthinkable does happen.
Let me give you another question. We have a question here from one of our participants here that's asked about local church events. When you're planning a big event this summer, maybe a vacation Bible school or something, or an outreach in the park, what kind of insurance you might need for that? What should they do?
If you're going to some place that requires insurance, you may need a certificate of insurance for the place that you're going to. Do check with your current policy to make sure that there is coverage for off-premises. A lot of times there will not be off-premises medical payments, which medical payments will pay whether you're liable or not. Somebody trips and falls coming down the aisle, that's medical payments. There might not be any negligence on your part. You just want to make sure that there is coverage for that. So I would actually tell them to check with your agent and look at the policy. One of the things Rich does is he reads all the legal court cases that come across. I actually get to read insurance policies and assist with claims and with churches that have issues when there is a claim issue. So one of the fun things I do at night is get to read insurance policies. So I get to have some of the fun that Rich has too.
We got a question here about transgender credentialing in the Assemblies of God. I think this is at you, Brother Rich. Does the General Counsel have a policy about credentialing transgender individuals, and should local churches adopt some policy language in their constitutional bylaws about transgender?
I'm not aware of any policy addressing that issue. I don't see how that would be a possible status, however. But I'm not involved in those determinations. They may ask me would there be any legal consequences? And the answer is absolutely not, because to the extent the First Amendment guarantee of religious freedom means anything, it's at its apex, it's at its strongest with regard to churches and clergy performing pastoral functions. So to say that a church has got to ordain somebody, despite the church's doctrinal position, it's not going to happen.
I have a question about immigration issues.
Can I go ahead?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just beware of this. I know I was reading one of the insurance companies' directors and officers liability and employment practices liability. Rich mentioned employment practices liability. They're wanting to put, a lot of companies are looking to put an exclusion on the employment practices liability for discrimination against the LBGT. So you have to be aware that, as a matter of fact, they looked at putting that, because the insurance companies automatically kind of put that out, they looked at put that on the general counsel's employment practices liability, which I take care of the insurance for the general counsel also. And I did not allow it. I went through what our bylaws were. I went through exactly how it was not going to be discrimination, and I did not allow them to put it on there because I didn't want somebody bringing a case and there not being coverage. But you guys need to be aware that that is an issue that insurance companies are looking like there was not an exclusion for sexual misconduct so many years ago. It was just automatically included. Then they put exclusions as some of the court cases started coming out. You need to be aware that if you do not know what your policy says, there can be exclusions in there for that.
I want to ask about immigration, and that's something we could talk about for hours, I understand. Illegal immigrants here, or undocumented immigrants in the United States, the policy of the General Counsel is not to issue credentials to those individuals, but sometimes our local churches hire them as pastors or custodians or whatever. Churches sometimes want to give benevolence funds to those that are undocumented. Sometimes there's requests from undocumented individuals to get married in the church, sometimes with a legal ceremony, sometimes it's not a legal ceremony. Some of our churches want to put undocumented individuals on their church board, or they apply to become church members. Can you just really briefly talk about any of these immigration issues and how they may affect our local churches?
It all depends. Next. There's a lot you've asked there, but let me and I'm not an immigration authority. I occasionally get immigration questions, and we always refer them to an immigration attorney in Virginia that's really excellent. And you probably have attorneys you work with here. I'm sure there are many that you work with that are immigration. That's a specialization. You don't see many people do immigration and other issues. It's so complicated. But there are certain things that I know about it, and talking to some of these attorneys, there's nothing that can happen because of your decision to issue credentials to an undocumented worker. So we can confer ministerial status on anyone we want, regardless of immigration status. That's protected by the First Amendment. The problems all arise when you pay compensation to the person. Then there are issues that arise. They're not that significant, in my opinion. For example, an employer has to obtain evidence of the person's immigration status and ability to work in this country, authorization to work in that's the I-9 form. Last year, there were 3 employers in the United States that were charged with a $275 penalty for not complying with that law. So the penalty structure, it's important to know what the law is, but it's really, and that's what a lot of people have said, that we could solve the immigration problems in this country from their perspective just by enforcing the law as it is. The 1986 immigration reform law required the I-9. All you need to do is prove an applicant's identity and employment eligibility to work in this country at the time of hire, and then you can make a decision whether to hire that person or not. That has never been enforced. And then you have the problem of people coming into this country on visitors' visas that overextend. Many of the people in this country that are undocumented have expired visitors' visas. But there's nothing to prevent them from being pastors to have a pastoral status, and there's no problem with them becoming a member of a church. Those are First Amendment protected categories. The problem was with compensation. I don't want to overstate that problem because it's pretty minimal, that's probably the general comments I would.
And benevolence is okay. It's okay to.
Yeah, I think benevolence is okay. I've never seen that issue ever addressed, but I could see where that could be defensible.
All right, I have one final question about your Sunday school class.
You have one further question?
Okay, you tell us the age. I've heard different ages. You probably taught different classes over the years. What are you teaching right now?
I'm teaching fifth grade.
Fifth grade.
Which are 10 and 11-year-olds, most of them, mostly 11, a few 12. And I've got 10 to 15 kids. Parents, I always urge parents to come. And I often have parents in the room. I had a psychologist from New York that stopped in the class a couple of weeks ago. He considers it his Sunday school class whenever he's in town.
Did you do background screening on him before he came?
Pardon me?
Did he complete the background screening before he came?
No, because he was under my strict supervision. But I just love teaching it. It's really kind of crazy. Let me tell you the last lesson. I try to incorporate current events and historical events. And so the week of the 100th anniversary of what happened on the night of April 14th, 1912, you know what that was? The sinking of the Titanic. So we incorporated that into my lesson that week. I played a staticky recording of the CQD SOS message sent out by the RMS Titanic as it was sinking. And it's just gripping drama. And I'm an amateur radio operator, so I'm translating this. Sinking fast. Women and children in boats. Come quickly. So this was high drama in class. And so then what did I do? Teach them that for? Because I tied it to what our main topic that day, which was prayer. And I said, what if those two telegraph operators, which were not White Star Line employees, by the way, they're Marconi employees, what if they had decided not to send that message for help? It's useless. Nobody's going to be here on time. The Carpathia got that message. They were stopped for the night. And the captain fired up his steam engines, and they raced to the scene through iceberg-littered dark fields. And they got there just 2 hours after the Titanic sank. And they plucked up people on lifeboats. Well, what if the telegraph operators had said, "This is hopeless. We're not going to send this message"? Nobody would have been saved. 1,500 people ended up being saved because of those telegraph, because they sent the message. So kids, no matter how bad a situation appears to you, help is available, and if you ask for it.
You have an affirmation that you speak to every one of those kids.
Yes.
Sunday. Can you tell us what that affirmation is?
Yes, absolutely. Probably 15 years ago, I had a foster girl in the class. So what kind of hell had this girl been through? And I'll never forget this. When she was walking out of class one day, I said, I'll call her Katie. I said, "Katie, you're awesome and you're beautiful." And she just started shaking, physically shaking. I was just taken aback by it. But every week thereafter, I got down on one of my knees, I looked in her face, and I said, "Katie, you're beautiful and you're awesome." It was an amazing thing to see her transformed by those words that I spoke into her life. Well, fast forward 1 year. It was our last day of class for that group. And, I knelt down and said those same words. And then she had her little purse, and she reached into it, and I could tell she was fumbling around looking for something. And she pulled out a little plastic rabbit that was all scratched up, and she handed it to me as a gift. Worthless in one sense, but of infinite value in another. And that rabbit is on my desk all through these years. And I look at it frequently because it helps me to reset my priorities. What am I doing that's impacting the lives of other people? And so ever since then, Jay, every class I've taught for the last 15 years, I end the class, I've changed the wording a little bit. I say, "You're awesome and you're going to change the world. I want those kids to have heard that from somebody in their life. And that's a little, I view, when I look at teaching 5th grade, I've come to the conclusion, they're not going to remember, most of them, probably much, if anything, that I say, even these dramatic stories. Some of these dramatic stories they might. But they remember rituals, and I'll call them rituals. So that's one of them, telling these kids they're awesome and they're going to change the world. I think that's the kind of thing they're going to remember in a nursing home someday, and they'll pass on to their kids. So I'm always alert to that, the repetitive emphasis of certain things. I always start class by pulling 10 parakeet ladders out of a felt bag, and I put them against the wall, and I say, kids, look at these ladders. They thought I was crazy when I went to a pet store and bought 10 parakeet ladders. Boy, that guy likes parakeets. And so I say, kids, the lights on the ceiling represent heaven. These 10 ladders here represent man's religions, just 10 of them. What is a religion? It's climbing to heaven by the rungs of the ladder, doing what the religion prescribes. The 5-fold path of Islam, the 5-fold step of Buddhism, and on and on and on and on. You do the things on the ladder, and you're going to climb into. I said, but do you reach heaven? Oh, no, it's too much of a gap. I said, that's exactly right. Because no works-based religion is going to get you to heaven. There's only one way to get to heaven. There's only one religion that doesn't teach works, and that's Christianity. That we get to heaven not by what we do, but by what Jesus did in our place. It's a dramatically different view. And I think one of the proofs of its truth is that no other religion teaches it. So that's another one of the rituals I do. The kids will remember those parakeet ladders, I think, in years to come.
Amen, amen. Would you give a big hand to Rich Hammer and Jerry Sparks?